Let's get salty!
Everyone, Zeddy here again today with a brand new video, and I want to make a video today that is the most subjective thing ever that I have held off on making for a long time, but this showed up in my recommended. This showed up in my recommended as an old Kripp sub, the top 10 worst design cards ever. And it's like, what even quantifies like what the worst design card is? It's totally subjective, but to me, it's like a card that had to either be like reworked, changed, or just piss people off, or just makes the game overall feel worse. And I'm gonna try to limit it to cards that Kripp did not include back in the day. Again, this is like 5 years ago. I will link it below. You go like it's Baku, Prince Keliseth, we got Implosion, which would be really high on my list. Barnes, the coverage below would be high on my list. Patches the Pirate, Mind Control Tech, Shutterwalk, which still dominates to this day, Jade Idol, and Warsong Commander was his first, which got reworked, but the funny thing is, it's at its current state now. So we're gonna go over my picks for the 10 worst design cards in Hearthstone history. Let me know in the comments below what you agree with, disagree with, because again, it is super subjective. What I think is a badly designed card, you might think is an awesome card, and there is nothing wrong with that, unless it's like a priest card. Enjoy the content on the channel. If you like, I've earned your subscription, please hit that sub button down below. Give the video a like, and now let's take a look at my picks for the worst design cards of all time. Starting off at number 10, we have a card that recently rotated to Wild in Sin Stone Graveyard, a new location. Locations did exist when Kripp made this video, but yes, the location where originally at its first state was 2 mana, and you would summon a 1/1 ghost with stealth that gained +1/+1 for each other card you played this turn. And it just created this super toxic archetype where not only were you like spamming a billion cards as a rogue, you were being rewarded with it in a card that had been previously Hall of Famed and removed from standard in Edwin Van Cleave, a giant minion, but on top of it, it had stealth, which very few classes had any meaningful way to interact with, and eventually it did lose that stealth element. It was still a pretty good card. It was still insane, and I could put Necrolord Draka as a reminder, same type of deal. Those type of cards to me are just not very fun to deal with when you can't meaningfully interact with them in any way, whether it be a stealth or the Draka, sometimes the weapon outright killing you, although you could Viper it or ooze it or whatever, so it's not quite as bad in some ways. At number 9, I have the Demon Hunter card Sinful Brand, which when this card originally came out was 1 mana, brand an enemy minion, whenever it takes damage, deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. So it's very cheap, very efficient, and I'm gonna put as an honorable mention alongside it, the Jormunger card that also got nerfed for Hunter, where these were cards that basically punish your opponent for playing minions. Like you never wanted to play a minion with a considerable amount of health, because if you did, your opponent would put this on it or put a Jormunger on like a rush minion and kill you. Like it was one of the more infuriating gameplay experiences out there where you're punished for just playing the game of Hearthstone the way you're supposed to play it. You'll note some themes on this list have to do with that for me. I feel like that's bad design. And yeah, Sinful Brand and the Jormunger type of cards, really unfun. And I'll even throw as an honorable mention, if you're an arena player, the origami cards make you feel like you're being punished for playing minions these days. When put at that level, I think they're a little bit more reasonable, and they see no ladder play, but it is that style of like, I just don't like being punished for playing the game of Hearthstone. It's already punishing enough as it is a lot of the time. At number 8, I'm gonna go with Ice Block. Ice Block has been around since day 1. It has never been nerfed, it's never been reworked, and it has driven people crazy for over 10 years. The Mage Secret, when your hero takes fatal damage, prevent it and become immune this turn. And we've seen plenty of reprints of this type of a card, whether it's like Evasion or Timeout, but they've always had a bit of, well, you can't just play it and have it sit there and you're just immune and you can't do anything about it. And now with Mage being able to create more and more copies of it, it just lets them do pretty much whatever they want in Wild, at least, where, yeah, the quest got nerfed recently, more on that card later. Still, they can play whatever they want because they can just hide behind Ice Block and then combo you down with whatever. The only saving grace for the card is there is counterplay to it with like secret removal cards or like damaging them on their turn with like the fatigue effect, or just, you know, put a bomb in their deck or whatever. Put some damage for them to hit afterwards, but still, a very infuriating card, and one that's like, how do you nerf this card? Do you make it a legendary? Do you make it once per game? Then why do you run 2 copies of it? That's kind of a sign the card is just not the best design out there. At number 7, you know I had to mention the witch. Mind Render Elusia in her original version was a 2-mana 1/3, and you would swap your hands and deck with the opponent until the end of the next turn. So you could just, you know, rip their hand, play it out, and they got nothing left. Take their combo piece just like that. Or there was the other usage which got it nerfed eventually, was you just dump your hand, play a Lucia in an aggro deck, your opponent has no hand to try and counteract you. They got nothing because your hand was empty. Effectively a time warp. Again, more on that card later. So the card was eventually reworked because it turns out it's not very fun in Hearthstone if someone just gets to take your hand and do whatever they want with it. That is just too powerful effect and just not fun. It's anti-fun. It was just a miserable experience for everyone except the person playing the card, which led to a rework. And I will give an honorable mention to Tony King of Piracy, doing a similar type of thing, which led to him being reworked as well. So now that you just don't get your opponent, you don't switch your opponent's deck, you just get a copy of it, just like a Lucia. How about we don't do this style of design again? Hopefully we've learned after 2 tries at this. All right, let's get it out of the way. At number 6, we have Open the Waygate, recently nerfed to be once per game. But this card originally, you could go as many turns as you want as long as you could copy the effect, which was impossible when it launched, and it used to cast 5 spells to get the reward. But it turns out when you fundamentally break one of the key rules in Hearthstone, which is, you know, turns, and letting your opponent have one, it's pretty darn problematic. And I will mention, a card like Zarimi seems like it might fall into that place where even if it's just 1 per game, it's still a pretty frustrating experience. This has basically restricted Mage forever and WoW to just play the quest because that was that broken to always be able to take infinite turns, and there's no way to counteract that once it goes on live. You're done unless you gain like a bajillion armor. They can't kill you in time and it's like a draw. That can't happen. But overall, I just don't think this was a well-designed card, but it is also one of my most played cards because it does go on that flip side of it's just a really crazy, insane card that you never really see otherwise, and it's pretty cool in that regard. So for me, it's lower on my list for that bias, but I do think, yeah, the design was flawed, and that did lead to a rework of the card. At number 5, we have another Demon Hunter card in Glide, a 4-mana spell. You shuffle your hand into your deck, draw 4 cards. That's perfectly fine. However, Outcast, your opponent does the same. Opponents built up a game plan, they built up a large hand, they get to play their card. No, they lose them. They get them shuffled, and they don't know what they get back. They have no say in it. It's just going to happen. This type of hand disruption, utilization, super toxic experience to face. It wasn't very good at the beginning. The quest line made it good. More on that later. But this type of card to me was just super unfun. Toxic design that ended up being competitive, where again, a card that mass manipulates your hand like a Mind Render Lucia, like a Glide, I don't think is healthy when the other player has no say in it and there's not much counterplay. You can have a counter spell up, I guess, but there's just not much you can do against it. And it was just one of the more tilting cards out there. Very glad it's rotting in Wild, but unfortunately it still does pop up here and there in that format. I will say an honorable mention as well, Divine Favor, kind of in a similar vein of punishing your opponent for holding cards that, oh, I get to draw cards because you didn't vomit your resources to try and counteract me. But in today's Hearthstone, basically everyone has a full hand. Divine Favor, not really talked about, not really running wild at all anymore. At number 4 on my list is my least favorite secret of, well, actually not quite. There's one more I might dislike. Objection on that. Anyways, least favorite secret out there in Oh My Yogg, the 1-mana paladin spell. Secret, when your opponent casts a spell, they instead cast a random one of the same cost. Counterspell's a pretty disliked card, right? And for a third of the cost, you often get a better counterspell. Why? The amount of times you'll play like a 3 or 4 or 5 mana spell, no way to really get around it if you don't have a cheap spell to burn, it can just backfire. You can hit yourself in the face, you can overdraw cards, you can like delete your own hand somehow. To me, it was almost infuriating, frustrating cards out there that I wanted it outright deleted from the game, because why is Counterspell better at 1 mana? It's not always better, but it was quite often better, so much that I will refuse to ever craft this card golden, but I will keep it in case I want to play and be toxic like that. So yeah, Oh My Yogg, absolutely one of the worst design cards out there. At number 3, we have a card that was recently nerfed from 2 to 4 mana. Due Process, Druid spell for the rest of the game. So that is, you cannot interact with that. It's happening. Players draw an extra card at the start of their turn, and you could play another one of these. You could solar eclipse it. You could just make your opponent mill and they can't do anything about it. They can't play their game plan. It could happen on turn 2, and it's one of the more infuriating things. You're especially trying to play a control deck. There's no way you can beat that. No way you can out fatigue it. And Druid, the class with access at the time to Guth and can go to 20 mana, of course they can burn their cards. They can afford it. Whereas you're playing probably not Druid, and yeah, it's a miserable experience. One of my least favorite cards. The fact that there's a for the rest of the game card that affects both players and one player has 0 say on it, just to me, again, not the type of design I love to see in Hearthstone. At number 2, we do have another secret, the secret I loathe more than any other secret in the game. It recently rotated a wild, the Mage Secret. Objection. 3 mana, and when your opponent plays a minion, counter it. There is no way to play around this secret other than having a cheap minion to throw away. And not only does the minion just disappear on the board, you don't get its battle cry effect, and secrets can be generated by multiple classes, and again, really hard to play around, and it defeats the purpose of what you're trying to do in Hearthstone, which is play minions. I don't think I've gotten more frustrated, more angry, just more blood boiling induced rage, except for one card coming out a little bit later. Should this be a list of just the cards I hate? If it was cards I hate, I'd have like Theotarian here, entire priest class or whatever, entire demon hunter class. This is just a poorly designed card. When they made a secret counter in the literal same mini set to this card, it didn't even beat Objection. Objection beat Tight Light Witness in a secret battle or whatever. That's bad design. When you literally could not counter this in any meaningful way other than just throw a cheap minion away, it's going to get obliterated, or you have Flare in Wild. And there you go. You got some Flare. I like that. Also Office Space reference. Do you have enough Flare? Anyways, at number 1, what's my pick? I mean, come on. You know what I think the worst design is, right? We have the quest lines. I'm gonna not just say the Demon Seed in general. I'm gonna say the quest lines were introduced in United and Stormwind. They tell you exactly how to play the game, no matter what. So I'm gonna take damage on my turns. I'm gonna take damage on my turns. I'm gonna play an uncounterable, at the time, there was no like Dirty Rat in Standard, there's no Mutinous, there was nothing. There was nothing, no objection. We need an objection to counter these rewards that just won the game. So it's like having every deck, almost every quest line was like an OTK deck with your OTK finisher in your opening hand, guaranteed, almost uncounterable, and then the effect of like a Blightborn Tamsin, you can't counter. It's for the rest of the game. Damage you take on your turn damages your opponent instead. How are you beating infinitely scaling fatigue damage? It's just not a thing. Questline's literally obliterated control from Hearthstone, and it still is yet to fully recover. It's there, but it's not the same, and it all started with these awful quest lines that force players to play, again, a specific way. There was inevitability. There's no way to stop it for the most part. It made every game feel the same, and there's nothing you can do about it once it happened. And to me, the quest lines are the worst design in Hearthstone, and the cream of the crop for me is the Demon Seed, more so than the rest. Shout out to Find the Imposter. This one was actually cool, was actually fun, just gave you value, and it didn't see a lot of play. The Paladin one wasn't too bad either, although it did have the inevitability with like just giant dudes, but still, they weren't all horrendous, but overall, they were the worst design, in my opinion, in Hearthstone history. So let me know again in the comments down below what you agree with, disagree with. I won't let Nova see that Scabs is on the screen. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Have a great day and stay salty, my friends.